Live for us tonight in studio with more on that part of our story. Matt, from what we understand, she was initially shocked about this.
Absolutely, Chris and Abby. As we have reported throughout the day, several people in the community are surprised by this news. Gianna Tinney is the mother of a Pittsfield High School student who actually had felt supported by 30-year-old Levante Wiggins over time. Now that the school's dean of students is facing drug trafficking charges, she tells us she is definitely sad.
It's a good reminder that we need to be aware of who we're letting our children be around in all aspects.
A powerful message from Tinney after shocking revelations revealed by the United States District Court this week. Levante Wiggins, a 30-year-old administrator at Pittsfield High School, and another Pittsfield man, 42-year-old Theodore Warren, arrested Wednesday night and have each been charged with one count of conspiracy to distribute and possession with intent to distribute cocaine. Before everything came out, Tinney said there was a good relationship her son had with Wiggins at two different schools.
My son really struggled at that school. He felt really unsupported, and I think Mr. Wiggins was a really great source of support for him. I think he felt really heard and very respected by him.
Tinney says two things can be true at the same time, that someone can do meaningful work while also being accused of something horrible. In court documents obtained by Western Mass News, it's alleged Wiggins had operated a drug trafficking organization while Warren served as a runner for it, and both men distributed large amounts of cocaine in and around Pittsfield. In fact, in August, according to the documentation, Wiggins sent Warren to complete deliveries of the drug after he expressed concern that he was under investigation. The documents also claim Wiggins had a customer who amassed more than $34,000 in debt for cocaine that Wiggins had provided on credit. Tinney tells us she has told her son what the allegations are against Wiggins.
We just talked about how, although it's really unfortunate, there are legitimate reasons for people doing the things that they do, even if we can't understand it or if we wouldn't do them ourselves.
Tinney's son also asked nuanced questions to her, including what the consequences would be if Wiggins and Warren were to be found guilty. The answer, up to 20 years in prison, supervised release for up to a lifetime, and a fine that could reach $1 million. The Pittsfield mother, who has worked in the court system herself, also believes this incident does not reflect well on the school administration.
That's unfortunate because there definitely are a lot of people doing really good things. And I don't want that to be taken away from.
Now, earlier in the afternoon, a letter was sent out to the Pittsfield High School community. This is from Pittsfield's principal, Maggie Harrington Esco, which reads in part, quote, "We communicated with students and staff the priority of academics and maintaining a sense of normalcy during this time. To support this effort, we asked that the situation not be discussed in classrooms and provided teachers with strategies to redirect conversations." It goes on to say, quote, "We are proud to share that our students access the supports provided with respect and thoughtfulness, demonstrating an impressive level of emotional maturity. Throughout the day, they showed the kindness, compassion, and understanding that truly define Pittsfield High School as a strong and caring community." At the end of the interview, Tinney shared how she hopes not just she and her son, but those affected by these revelations can heal from this, and that everyone can rely on trusted sources of information as this case plays out. Stick with Western Mass News, both on air and online, as we follow the very latest. Reporting live in the studio, Matt Price, Western Mass News.
Thank you, Matt.
The Ware Police Department arrested